welcome everyone. If you are thinking of applying for an MBA and you've started researching Cornell, you've started researching Cornell Tech, this is going to be a really, really relevant video for you to watch. I have with me Ayushi, and Ayushi is someone that is such a pleasure to interact with. She's someone that we've enjoyed working with in the past, but I would really like for Ayushi, if you could introduce yourself, give us a sense of, where you're coming from, what you're doing right now. We have so many questions to ask you about Cornell.
Perfect. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Natasha. So I think, yes, a little bit about me. My name is Ayushi Kotak. I'm passed out from Johnson Cornell, the Tech MBA program, so batch of 26. And just to give you a little sense of life prior to MBA, right? I've worked for roughly 6 years prior to MBA, and I look at my career in two halves. And I think the first half of it was a little bit more creatively dominated. I started work mainly working on the advertising and ad sales side of it, where I worked with one of the largest agencies in India, leading brand campaigns for incredible brands across the board, Heineken, Levi's, the works, right? And I think the second half of my career, I would like to look at it as a little bit more defining and the real hockey curve, where a part-time consulting engagement with some early stage startups ended up being, I think, a full-blown passion in itself. I worked with a host of early stage startups, literally from launch pre-revenue to scaling them to like the first million, 5 million revenue mark in many ways, with many of them going on to air on Shark Tank or raising funding from partners like Axel and Matrix. And I think really saw that journey from seed to scale. And cut to now, I currently lead growth for a fintech startup called Gently across Southeast Asia and UAE. So I think that gives you a little sense of the journey I've had so far.
It's great to understand where you're coming from and where you are today, because we have, again, so many questions around your MBA experience, and I'm sure this gives a lot of context to, the kind of questions we're going to ask you. Typically, I like to understand a little bit about your perspective and then talk about, the whole MBA journey that you went through at the point of application, as well as, your experience on campus. So let's start with your perspective as it stands today. So if a prospective applicant, okay, for an MBA were to ask you just point blank, like, was the MBA worth it? How are you going to answer that standing where you are today?
Right. I'm seeing a relatively fresh out of the program. So I think a good way to look at it, and what I encourage most people to do, is an MBA is as much of a personal and financial decision as it is a professional one, right? And I think going into the process, having clarity on what you want out of it on both sides, both from the long term perspective, but also the short term perspective, is a good way to look back in and assess how this decision has played out. So 1 year post MBA, I can tell you that for me, my personal goals were more anchored on the side of wanting to really push myself out of a comfort zone. I've lived and worked in Bangalore in the startup ecosystem for most of my life. And I feel like while I absolutely loved it, I feel like I was in some ways wanting to push myself outside a relative, I think, bubble that I've kind of built in myself into in that place. So from that point of view, when I look at it from a personal point of view, I've lived in 2 countries since I have graduated. I've traveled across the board. I've lived in New York for an adult version of my life, built a podcast with some of my batchmates, attended some of the most interesting conferences in industries relevant to me, but outside as well. And I think it really pushed me outside of the comfort zone, which was the personal goal, right? Professionally, I think the idea was definitely to look at a stepping stone which allowed stronger and deeper global mobility and access to a community. And I think, again, 1 year out, having moved to Singapore more for personal reasons since my partner was here, but and knowing absolutely no one in this ecosystem, to have a network and alumni base of Cornellians where I can just kind of tap on, or walking into an industry and a role in which looks into multiple markets versus the singular market that I've worked in previously. Again, professionally, I feel like that checks out as well. So like when I look at it in terms of the immediate goals that I had out of it, I feel like checks both boxes, so has been quite worth it.
I mean, that's a really comprehensive answer because I think for me, one of the questions that I really wanted to ask you going into this conversation is, how did your ROI calculation for the MBA really differ? Because you came from like a startup founding team, you've come from a very different background versus someone
Right,
who's from a very conventional corporate track of like a very staid or environment, financial services, consulting. So
right.
I just want to understand your perspective on the ROI.
So, I mean, I think one I would like to say is maybe slightly more tangible versus the other, right? Like, I think when you work on a stable corporate career of sorts, like, I think there's quite literally money that you're leaving on the table in terms of the paths that you know is carved out for you, right? Versus, I think in the startup space, I feel like there could be really that version of the hockey curve kind of growth in terms of career and or um,
Yeah.
again incentives and financial or otherwise that could work out as well for you. So I think for me it was more of the latter, where the idea was I was a very early team for a founding startup. So the idea was definitely coming to terms with the math in terms of the fact that you would be leaving something on the table which might not be realized immediately right now but could in the long term of it, and building enough comfort around it, I guess.
Mm, mm. So I think your perspective is very different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I now want to focus a little bit on the kind of insights and skills or instincts that you've really developed. Um,
Hmm.
and I would really want to ask you that, given where you are today, what what instincts or skills do you use now that you feel is really a byproduct of, the MBA experience?
Absolutely. I think it's a really nice way to look at it in terms of for me going into the MBA. I think for most people, at least those who decide to obviously, I think, do one internationally as well, is plucking yourself outside an environment you've kind of thrived in, have built and compounded some level of growth in, and placed yourself in a completely new environment, right? And with it, I think the fact that you move countries, build new routines, networks, break into newer industries or and roles, comes a lot of discomfort, comes a lot of hardship, comes a lot of rejections as well, right? So I think the first and most important skill that I think it's kind of the entire journey is embedded is a deeper sense of resilience and growth mindset. Like you don't look, I think you kind of enter into the sink or swim mode when you're out there because so much has changed in such a short period of time that it really enables you to uh, internalize a lot of these other things and kind of like move on and move forward with just a stronger mindset, which I think is ingrained in me, I think now and forevermore. And I think on the flip side of it, it is it helps you to understand how important it is, or the skill of building meaningful equations.
Yeah.
The idea of a community really unlocking a large part of your life. Like again, a lot of the outcomes that you see from the MBA is as it's as good as the network that you kind of build out of it, both within the
Yes.
cohort and otherwise. And I think a lot of people through this entire journey will really help you kind of experience or get the true unlock of an MBA. So I think both of these skills have, yeah, I think been deeply embedded in me through the entire process.
Yeah. I'm just going to go a little behind to understand the thought process that you had going into the MBA, right? Like, did you have second thoughts about pausing your career, in a really high growth startup kind of environment? But did you have second thoughts about pausing this career for 2 years, at the point of wanting to do an MBA? It can be scary for a lot of people.
It can. And I think so. One of the things that ends up happening by nature of A, selecting a 1 year program, and B, also going in slightly later on in your career, I would like to say that a lot of people end up going at the 3, 4 year mark. And I'd like to believe I've gone a little later than expected, is it allows you to have better perspective, because I think the MBA journey is truly like a reflection one. Like it's the kind of it's the step back that you take to look back and really assess all the things that have happened in your life and your career and how you want to prepare for the next phase of it in some ways, right?
Yeah.
So I want to say just again by nature of the program length and the fact that I went in a little later, it enabled me to feel a lot more comfortable with it. Um, And I think apart from that, again, I think it it is it's a very deeply personal one. For me at that point of time, I think it was also about timing and how fulfilled I felt in my career. At that point of time, I had seen two very strong early stage journeys again, from again seed to scale entirely. I felt like I had deeply enjoyed a lot of them, but I also felt ready to kind of take that step back to
Yes.
really process the emotional roller coaster that had been the last 4 years of my life, right? So I
Yeah.
think both of those, a couple of those things really kind of just helped feed into the decision and made it a lot more easier for me to take a nod at it. Yeah.
Right. And I do want to mention that I think, when you want to start your MBA journey is, like you said, a highly personal decision. I always feel that between 4 and 6 years is really that ideal inflection point because you start realizing a lot about the way you work, what's important to you, in
Yeah.
terms of how you process professional decisions, how you think about growth not just, the next 12 months, but then you're thinking more long term. And I think you develop that maturity of perspective once you've seen like a couple of business cycles and you've had experiences where
So,
you
yeah.
understand the complexities of what it takes to make certain decisions. So, I just want to put it out there because I really feel that you get the maximum value of reflection between 4 and 6 years of having a career, because you've made mistakes, you've succeeded, you failed, you've celebrated. So you have a lot of experiences to process and inform that YMBA
Yeah.
decision. And I'm just thinking back to conversations that we've had in the past, at the point of application. So I think
Fair.
that's even more so true now, when you look at the timing of an MBA. So yeah, I think it's interesting to get that perspective of when you think about taking that break. I just want to now talk a little bit about because you've touched on like both the kind of program, the duration of the program. So can you tell us a little bit about why Cornell Tech really appealed to you? Like, why did Cornell's program appeal to you? Why did the tech program appeal to you?
Absolutely. I mean, if I look at it, I would say there are three aspects to it, right? If I have to like define it quite clearly, I think I look at cohort curriculum in city. That's the way I think I've been able to post rationalize this and a lot better at least. Um, I think for me, if you look at the key traits of what my career has been, technically a very non-traditional MBA applicant in some sense, right? I'm a startup operator, someone who's worked on commercial growth but also has creative roots. Like again, it's a very distinct sense of um, the kind of profile that you come in with, which you don't necessarily see in a lot of MBA students, right? And which is where I think the cohort or the alumni base was the first deciding factor of it. I could see myself a lot more clearly in the career outcomes that I have seen in a lot of individuals who've gone through that program or already part of that program, which made it feel a lot easier and not I mean, credit where credit due. I feel like other business schools also are increasingly having an interesting mix overall. But I think Cornell Tech specifically had a deeper concentration of some of those outcomes, which I felt was very reassuring.
Yeah.
The second was on curriculum. Again, by nature of, again, if you go back to my profile, um, it's a program that allowed you to take on core business electives, which is relevant to me considering I've done a lot of commercial growth kind of work as well, right? But you could be in a curriculum that allows you to probably look at strategic communication and advanced strategic analysis and managerial finance and do a lot of these business courses, but also in the same breath look at working on designing data and AI products or deeper insights into user experience with a cohort also that I think comes from some of those backgrounds. So I think curriculum was the second one. And the last was City. It's a 1 year program, which means that you want to increase the surface area of luck overall, which is being in a city that enables interactions for you to build that network, to really drive some of those outcomes for yourself. Um, I think Cornell Tech checked off all of those boxes, which really helped.
Yeah, I'm really interested to talk about the city part of it. Um, can you tell us some of the highlights of your time in New York? Like, what are things that you look back on so fondly and you'd really want like an incoming, student to experience?
I think the way I describe it best is I think of think of the city as a very present and large experience and classmate on some version of it through your entire journey, right? It it really is like the character the city plays in the backdrop of the city of New York in particular. I think changes pretty much everything because I can say it from, let's say, a professional lens where you can think of some of the most interesting professionals working in fields across advertising, finance, tech, across the board, right, are just literally a train ride away or a coffee chat
Yeah.
away entirely, right? So
Yeah.
there's that. There's the fact that it is home to some of the most interesting events happening across the board as well. Like when I was there, I think there was New York Tech Week. There's a bunch of communities around Super Momos and other players who um, create a lot of spaces for like-minded individuals interested in very specific fields, right? From cybersecurity and data and governance or ad tech to kind of come together as well. There were Cornell, by nature of its association, does a lot of events and talks at Bloomberg. So we had
Mm.
again leading investors from Lightspeed and A16Z just kind of drop by and like talk about the latest thesis that they had on the companies that they were investing in. So just think about it. This is all over and above the traditional curriculum experience which you're getting again from an incredible institute. So I think the city really plays a very large role in the overall sense. And of course, I think there's the cultural and other side of New York, which I think you'd want to just enjoy. You'd want to have lazy days cycling through Central Park, or you'd want to, I don't know, just take the ferry to skip the like train ride overall from Roosevelt, which has 3 modes of commute, by the way, which is just crazy overall. So yeah, I think the city in itself, I think, has been an incredible backdrop to kind of have to this entire program.
I mean, that's very descriptive, honestly. So I think it really gives me a 3D picture. And I do
Um,
agree. I think the accessibility, the immersion that you've had within that 1 year has just been such a beautiful experience, right? With that, I really want to come to understanding a little bit about the culture and the maybe the professional ecosystem, like recruiting.
mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that at Cornell?
Sure. So I think one of the more important things to kind of realize when someone selects a 1 year program is that it is the absence of basically an internship and any version of a senior junior mentorship that is traditionally unlocked in 2 year programs overall as well, right? Which makes it a very strong kind of self serve model when it comes to recruitment. Yes, you are in New York, you're located in Roosevelt Island, which is this tiny strip of island between Manhattan and Brooklyn as well, right? So, like, you obviously are very accessible to the city overall. So, you do have people coming in terms of alumni and more seniors and other batchmates who kind of come in to kind of have talks and conversations out there. But a large part of it is also what you make out of it. So I will say, in comparison, it tends to be a lot more self-serve. Where one of the tips I would give to most students coming in is, of course, come in, settle down, and things like that. But start building that network very early, like by month 2 or month 3. If you have a couple of areas in terms of industries or and roles you're interested in, guess what? There's a plethora of people you can just kind of catch up with, Cornell alums or otherwise, right in the city. So it is focused on, I think the outcomes are what you make out of it.
Are there any like resources that you would say need to be on a student's radar pretty early on, like any campus-based resources, especially from the recruiting angle or from trying to make the connections that, like you said, from the second month or the third month onwards,
Right.
are there certain things that you want to put on people's radar at an early stage?
So I think one of the benefits of also being under the Johnson umbrella overall is that there are certain clubs that are shared across campuses. So by nature of that, of course, there's a lot of peer-to-peer mentorship that you can end up. So we have, like, let's say, like a lot of job action teams that come together very early on, where you kind of mock with each other, and you're able to do like get resume feedback and a lot of those other things. But then there's also certain clubs. So let's say there's like a product management club, or there's a women in tech club. Or there's a fintech club. So there are all of these specific clubs if you have interests in specific roles and or industries, where you can unlock again the larger power of being under the umbrella of Johnson,
Yes.
and speak to again to second year students who've probably interned already at some of these companies, who can have, there's obviously a lot of club resources that help you kind of prep you better for a lot of these interviews or and roles. So
Yeah.
I would say those would be the two things I would talk about in terms of resources on campus. Yeah.
That people need to be aware of. They need to be, ready to engage with. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's talk about costs because I think that is a question that comes on to everyone's, awareness, comes into everyone's awareness fairly early on. But we also
Yeah.
see pretty regularly that there are certain misconceptions because there's just so much information out there, right?
Yeah.
So I want to just understand, what your perspective is or what you would advise people to be aware of. Like, for example, my first question would be, what are the kind of unexpected costs beyond tuition, which everyone is aware of, but what is it that people should be aware of before
Right.
applying?
Before applying. Fair. So I mean, I think the I think there's a headline number that most people need to feel more comfortable on, and this is again holding true in the moment that we speak.
Yeah,
But I would say, let's say there's a larger number of 200K, which I would say that your MBA kind of frowns up to, right? And of course, tuition being a large part of it already. But I would say things that kind of add up really quick, which people don't necessarily account for, is first I would say is housing specifically, right? Like living in New York is no cheap affair overall. So you will
yeah,
have a significant portion go into just rent, utilities, and meal, like think between a 2.5 or 3K kind of range on the fact that you're sharing a space with someone else.
yeah,
Additionally, there is the idea of an MBA where I think an MBA is outside of just living and going to school. There is a larger social element of it, which I think really kind of comes into place where outside of these living expenses, you could look at a 10 to 30% kind of variance where you'd add on top, which involves maybe going to conferences or going to, again, social catch-ups or drinks or evenings that are organized with the cohort as a whole, which I think
yeah,
tend to kind of add up. An additional layer of it, which MBAs tend to be very largely indexed on, is also trips. So to give you an
mm,
example, uh, something as like again you could be as indulgent or not with it, but let's say something as simple as maybe wanting to do like a Bay Area trek that's part of the entire program, because again you'd want to kind of be there to meet some of the more interesting companies and or alums that are based on the
yeah,
West Coast, right? And you could factor in maybe somewhere between a 2 to 4K range for every trip that you take, and that being one of
yeah,
them, let's say. And additionally, you could be having ski trips and other stuff that kind of comes up. So um, I would say that keeping some of these costs in mind is important, um, because it, like coming back to what I said initially, is that it is also a
mm,
financial decision. And
mm,
you need to understand that to unlock the larger experience of it all, there will be a plus, plus, plus involved in it. And how comfortable you are with it should be a way that you decide if you want to take the step versus not.
right, right. And I think, I mean, those are decisions that you need to make extremely early on because it is
Absolutely.
not a decision that you can make after you put in an application, after you have to then be in a position to make a decision whether you're going to go or not, right? It is something
Yeah.
that you need to start researching at how you're going to manage budgets, how you're going to manage, juggling a year-long, journey where you're not having a job and,
Yeah.
not pulling in an income, and how you're going to look at that investment long term. So I think it's important for people to know all these details that you've just mentioned. Okay, I
Yeah.
want to now just go back a little bit because we're talking about your experience, but I want to now talk about the person or the stage that you were at before the application process.
Right.
And I want to, specifically focus on the kind of questions that you had to answer for, your Cornell Johnson application. So
Yeah.
maybe I think the first question I would have is that, what was the hardest question for you to answer, in the application coming from like a startup background?
Uh, um, I think by nature of the fact that maybe I was again maybe like so like under 10, maybe the seventh or eighth employee at a startup overall, a
Yeah,
large part of maybe some of the star stories that we kind of build on or whatever it is have probably nothing to do with the function that you largely see written on
yeah,
or that you're able to map into my career. You look at me and you think she works in marketing and she works in growth, but a lot of the narratives that you'll end up having is about maybe operations or CX or product, because that's the nature of the stage that the company that was in at that point of time, right? Which involves
Yeah.
you to kind of step in where needed. And I think um, to be able to kind of explain that in a way in which it doesn't end up becoming too context heavy was something that I think was a little difficult, where you don't kind of fit into this clear box that most people kind
Yes.
of come in from. I
Yes.
think that was the slightly harder bit.
I think that I relate a lot to what you're saying, because typically when we work with individuals who are from new age or startup kind of environments, I think it's important to remember that there's not always a very linear path where you can kind of talk about growth in terms of I went from analyst to senior analyst to associate to
Yeah.
you're then talking about a very broad canvas where, like you said, there have been decisions where you've been involved or you've been a part of something because just by nature of the fact that the expectations from you are far broader of taking
Yeah.
accountability and stuff. So I think that really resonates with me, because when individuals who have such a path are trying to fit their experiences, they realize that it doesn't really fit that standard box of what a lot of other this larger, or different paths
Yeah.
have. So I'm just glad to hear you say that, because it also just tells me that it's it's okay to not have that linear narrative. It's okay to
Exactly. Yeah.
have something that requires you to think very differently. So I mean, that's a great way to think about it. Um, when you articulate why do I need business school, but in a startup environment, you're already taking some of those strategic decisions, right? You're taking decisions where you're thinking about larger context and you're taking strategic decisions. But how do you articulate why business school when you're already doing some of that work on paper?
That's interesting, and I think the way to like look at that is the whole point of going to business school, and again comes back to the kind of goals that you have out of it, right? Like when I think it was very honest and candid in that entire space where I spoke about how I deeply enjoyed what I did, and I
Yes.
would want to be able to do that maybe in a global context or at a larger scale overall, right? And I think being able to be that honest on an application in some ways, I think really enables you to open up as to why it is important for you that, or
Yes.
why you think business school could be an interesting step for me. So I think for me, a large part of it came from the fact that I had seen quite the roller coaster of a journey, and I was in a place in which I did want to spend some time also reflecting on some of those decisions that I made, because I was fairly young when I went through that entire journey as well, right? And I think it requires some
Mhm.
perspective. Um, and I think on the flip side of it, you're also again, I think just coming from the place of, are you ready to kind of take that step back to reflect, and are you honest about why exactly you want to do it? And I think for me, it was a healthy mix of personal and professional that allowed me to kind of be honest, saying that yes, I was looking at widening my horizons and getting a deeper sense of global mobility in
Yes.
the work that I already do, or to be able to do it at scale. And I think that
Yeah.
was uh, yeah, I think that what hence the more honest answer on it is what holds true and can resonate a lot better, I guess.
And I think those are great starting points too. When you have an honest reflection where you say, is it scale? Is it, global exposure? Those are great points for someone to start that reflection of why do I really need, the degree? Because it's great. Again, like I said, just combined with a very non-linear path, it helps you really focus on the quantifiable elements of how an MBA is going to really work for you. It opens up the questions that you want to ask people like yourself,
Absolutely.
you know, as an applicant. Okay. I now also want to just talk about the fact that, like I said, we had a journey where everything wasn't linear. There were a lot of lessons, but they were at different, junctures and through very, very diverse projects, that you had pre-MBA. So when you look at the transition of just at the start of, putting an application together, just thinking I have so many things to say, but what am I going to say them
Yeah.
with context for? I just want to understand what was that point where you had an insight, like during our collaboration, what do you think started making sense to you when you're putting that
Right.
story together?
Um, so I think one of the things, and I think the larger inflection point that I look at is in some of the conversations that when I was having with Sham
Yeah.
specifically, shout out to Sham, who's an
Yeah.
incredible consultant to work with. Um, so the entire time that I was putting together my application, I think one of the things I've always looked at the angle of and the aspect of my profile where it does show that I'm slightly more creatively inclined, whether it was again early parts of my career or and life as well. I've always looked at it more as a bug than a feature in some ways. And I've always wanted to like downplay that aspect of it because again, you walk into this program, you see so many people who are on a very traditional path overall. So you're trying to fit yourself into this specific box, right? And I think through just larger conversations and explorations overall, to be able to get to a point where you start looking at it as an asset over a liability. It is something that's so deeply ingrained in you as a person, whether it's respect to the fact that, you know, the early life and childhood experiences and skills you've kind of developed or career decisions that you've made that allow you to kind of view it and unlock it as, again, a possible asset and like a wedge in some ways in terms of how you operate, how you have different perspectives, how you're able to color outside the box, right?
Yeah.
And to really kind of imbibe it as part of the personality and own it proudly rather than trying to fit into the traditional linear box that you feel like most people who go into MBAs for. So I think that unlock specifically really helped me kind of put myself a lot more out there naturally in the application, which I think, was
Yeah.
the truest sense of, I think that was the unlock in some ways.
I think somewhere, like, because I had also reviewed a lot of the work, I think what I also started seeing was, again, very specific to the fact that it's a very non-linear path, but there were larger patterns that started emerging
Yeah.
of your thought process, of your perspective. And that really aids the clarity with which you're able to put, yourself forward. Because I think it's important to realize that there are patterns of value systems and what's important to you and how your ambition comes out across so many such diverse experiences. So again, it's a very different way of looking at it and gaining clarity. I think that's something
Absolutely.
that really helps. And again, with Sham and you working together, I think those conversations really were able to bring out a lot of those patterns, which added up to who you are as a person.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. I think now I want to just also turn the lens because a person who's viewing this is going to be someone who's trying to think of the building blocks of their application.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think what I would want to lean on right now is really the benefit of your experience. Like, what should startup people who come from startups or application who are from applicants who are from non-traditional backgrounds like yourself, what should they be
Mm-hmm.
doing 6 months before they apply to really strengthen that business school application narrative?
Lovely. I think one of the things that I think it would have, I think, again, deeply benefited me had I started earlier also on it is just, like I said, the application in itself is the starting of the MBA journey, and the MBA journey is one of reflection. So you need to spend enough time um, thinking and writing a lot more in terms of what you think of your journey so far, right? As well. So, like, I
Yeah.
think it's a deeply like you need to be very self aware as you go through the process. And that involves being able to document and think clearly in some ways in terms of
Yes.
as you like look back at your journey so far, when you think about it, when you write about it, when you document the highs and the lows of it, what are the things that you're really seeing come through? And that level of self-awareness, I think, then translates really, really well into other aspects, like looking at schools that fit you best or career outcomes that interest you in terms of goals in long-term and short-term goals, or even speaking and selecting consultants you work with as well, right? Like that host of things kind
Yeah.
of gets so much more clearer when you walk into the process with a lot more self-awareness. So I would say that um, that would be the a very large chunk of the work that I would say if you do start early on, it is something that I think will deeply, deeply benefit you.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, from a school perspective, we touched on like school fit, right? What do you think are aspects about, Cornell Johnson that you feel an applicant needs to research further, and it would like help them stand out?
Right. Um, um, uh, the university and Johnson as a whole, but it started in 2012. Like for educational institution terms, it's still it's still finding its way. It's rough around the edges. It's scrappy, but it's deeply, deeply entrepreneurial in nature. And you will see it
Yes.
by nature of the people who kind of go there, by nature of the kind of curriculum and the products that you will end up seeing. So I think the things that uh, I think the AdCom is deeply interested in is also understanding how that fits well into the profile you've had. So whether it's on the curriculum, they have a very interesting space of building out a studio-based curriculum, whether it's product studio, and then you go on to do some version of startup studio versus Pico, and there's a series of like startup awards that where you end up
Yeah.
pitching and building actual companies literally incubated at Cornell, which could be an incredible journey so far. We've had people who've again built and dropped out and joined YC at some point of time. Like again, it's a very, very deeply entrepreneurial nature as well. So I think diving deep into the resources that are available at Cornell Tech, by nature of either the curriculum, the clubs, some of the ones that I've mentioned so far, and or courses that you feel like could interest you overall, or ideas that you're working on that you feel like could be a good fit at Cornell Tech as well. I think that part of it is there. And then I think on the flip side of it, it's also talking about the fact that Cornell really prides itself on being in the heart of New York in some ways, right? And again, they talk about the city playing such a large role. So I've touched upon some of those things today, but again, really understanding what within the city is something that you feel like will really unlock the experience for you. I think both of those aspects really will help and AdCom really understand why it's such a resounding yes for you in terms of this program and this city specifically.
Yeah. I think underscoring all of that is just to exercise that muscle of speaking to people and engaging in conversation. I think that is something that is highly underrated. And the more you do it, the more you find yourself, like you can imagine yourself on campus. You can find
Yeah,
yourself really believing in your potential and how you see a fitment there. So I think all the things that you've said, you need to start talking to people on campus so that
yeah,
what you're really attracted to. Of all
absolutely.
these things, like it's not enough to have very general statements. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
and the more you engage, I think a lot of these passions will come out more naturally. Like, what am I attracted to? What clubs? What experiences? What am I really
Yeah.
looking for? Another thing that you touched on something earlier where you said that, if you're starting early, one of the things you also need to think about is like, who do you want to engage with, right? While
Yeah.
preparing your application. So, that's
Right.
also something that I do want to ask you. Like, what is a piece of research that you would advise applicants to do before maybe engaging a consultant to help them with their application?
I, I mean, I think I would draw on what you said last, and I would say that um, it's something that I see students do a lot closer to when they're building out their application. Some of these schools
Yeah.
have questions around, what about this program specifically like enticed you, and that's when you see them, frantically reaching out to people on LinkedIn and trying to find the
Yes.
right club's name and things like that. But I don't think it needs to be about the application. I think it needs to be about a deeply personal decision. So speak to existing students or and alums across the schools that you're interested in long before you engage a consultant. I feel like
Mm.
that level of research is something you need to be doing much earlier rather than finding a fill in the blank in your application and trying to speak to
Correct.
students then to kind of quote that I spoke to someone and things like that.
Yeah.
It paints a much more vivid picture about the overall experience. You're also again building that network early on as well, because this is also resources that you'd kind of want to kind of build and engage a lot more as you get there. So I think that is something that I think is a non-negotiable for anyone before you speak to a consultant.
And when you speak to a consultant, what do you think should guide your decision whether to go with them?
Consultant versus not. Interesting.
I mean, what's the
I
value that
think
you think they need to understand that, whether I want to engage with a consultant or not? Like, very honestly, who would benefit, you know?
mhm. um, I think when you like it's something that I've felt slightly strongly from considering again, like I said, it's a very non-linear path, it's a non-traditional career. It's kind
Yeah.
of hard. Like I feel like when you speak to someone who doesn't operate in this ecosystem entirely, um, they'll again find it very, very hard to place you. And especially when they see a host of students in the past who come again from traditional finance, investing, consulting, corporate structures entirely, right? So
Yeah.
I think just having slightly more open-ended questions where you kind of engage with them, you speak to them about the experience they've had in the past with respect to the different set of clients that they've worked with, and
Yeah.
or how well you're able to articulate yourself or they're able to grasp the world you're coming from. I think both
Yes.
of those kind of play a role in deciding how you work with a consultant, because I feel like a great fit can really help you amplify that, and a wrong fit will really stifle that.
Yeah.
So I think those are the few things that I think would really help as you select,
Yeah.
a consultant who's quite literally like a very strong partner that you have in this entire journey, and you're constantly bouncing off ideas and working with. So yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just drawing on some of the earlier things you said. There are so many conversations where you have ideas and you want to recognize patterns and you want to add to how self-reflective and how the idea that you have of yourself and what matters to you. And I think having someone who challenges you at sometimes, questions you at sometimes, it really helps you think, yes, I said this, but do I really, how do I
Yeah.
justify this? How do I back this up? And you're right, having someone who understands that from your sector's perspective is a great addition to your journey. Okay. I now have a few fun questions that I would like to ask you, and I don't really want you to think too much about the answer, but it's just a fun round because I just want you to just leave us with something that will make someone think about the things they need to research. Okay. Can you tell us about Cornell Tech in 3 words?
um, I would say entrepreneurial, evolving, and just exciting in the name of alliteration, I guess. But yeah, these three.
I also say fast-paced, I think, right? Like the kind of experiences you're telling me about, it just gives me this impression of a really fast-paced environment. So I
Yeah, I
think that,
think it is like the experience is exactly what you would want to create out of it, and it is forever changing and forever evolving. And I think you're playing catch up. Like so much of everyone's just like, oh, you've moved from a startup to MBA. How does that pace treat you? I think it felt the same.
okay. Now, hardest class you've taken.
Hardest class I've taken. Oh, it's something I always run away with, even in terms of work. And I think it was maybe managerial finance. I hate looking at the models and building those out. I think it was, yeah, it's a little bit of my Achilles heel, but I feel like I got through it pretty well.
Okay. All right. One hidden gem resource at Cornell.
Mm, I would say, can I say two?
Yeah, yeah,
One I don't
please.
think is as hidden, but I would say is just like, I think there's a professor called Professor Gautam Ahuja. I think just anything that man touches is gold. And I feel like if you had the chance to like either work under him or learn under him, take it, grab it with both your hands. And I think the other is probably some of the intensives that run at Cornell. Like there's like a fintech and a culture media tech intensive, and a couple of these programs which I think are very interesting for those interested in the space. I think we ended up working with a host of. We worked with Spotify, the New York Times. I'm forgetting the other two, but like some very interesting companies that we ended up partnering with through that intensive and a host of topics we covered. So yeah, I think both of those were very interesting.
A favorite NYC hangout.
Favorite NYC hangout. So I mean, fun fact is, so on Roosevelt Island, which is where Cornell Tech is located, is connected to the city by three means of commute, which is the tram. You have I'm going to say the MRT because now I live in Singapore, but the MTA, like so you have the subway, and you have the ferry. And I can tell you that the ferry that you take from Roosevelt all the way down to like Wall Street and is just the most incredible journey that you will take. With we get to see the skyline of the city, and it's one of the things that I feel like a bunch of us just really enjoyed doing was hopping on the ferry and getting to downtown. And yeah, I think
Yeah, that was an
we've
answer I did not expect.
yeah, right,
I
full of
thought you were going to
surprises.
tell me like a favorite, hang up, like a coffee shop or something. I didn't think you would say the ferry,
So
but
I
it
feel like
just
it's also a little bit of an inside joke in our batch, but yeah, I love the ferry.
okay. Okay. Is there like what's the best Cornell tradition you
Mm.
experience?
uh, so I think that's a fun part because you can look at it from like like Cornell Ithaca, and then you can look at it from Cornell, which is Cornell Tech in New York as
Yeah.
well, right? And Cornell Ithaca, I think. So in the time that we spent there, which was just like a short of like we spent 3 weeks in the summer term out there. Um, I think the light slope is like one of the most popular hangouts overall. It's this again this beautiful slope where you can just sit, watch the sun come down, and I think every year before classes wrap up and before the finals happen, they have Slope Day, which happens out there, which is basically like just like an end of year festival that happens. Like I think the Chainsmokers performed last year and it was crazy. So I think that's something that most Cornellians like really look forward to. And I think on the Cornell Tech side of it, I feel like we're building. The fun part is that we build traditions of our own as well. But I think we end up doing like an end of semester. Well, a lot of these ideas that I'm giving are lot more marine themed, but we do like a sailboat expedition of sorts, which is
Okay.
very fun. We like go off from Chelsea Piers, and I think we like again are sailing through the Hudson, and I think we did it as a batch specifically, which I think at the end of I think both fall and spring. I think that was quite lovely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Tips for surviving the winter. Was there really a winter that impressed you?
Don't do the 2 year program. Do the 1 year program, and just spend the best and only time you should be spending in Ithaca, which is the summers.
Okay. I mean, thanks so much for participating in this, Ayushi. It's been a lot of fun catching up with you. And I'm sure there's a lot in this conversation to spark a lot of self-reflection for someone who's planning to apply to the program. So I'm really grateful for this conversation. So thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.
Likewise, Natasha, I feel like you refreshed some really great memories. So thank you so much for taking out the time. And yeah, I really hope this helps whoever's looking in to put in an application for Cornell.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Perfect.